morning we talked about George Washington and our Scholastic, right? We are going to read a book about George Washington, and then we're going to do a sheet, and we're going to write down facts that we learned about George Washington. I'm going to show you really quick what the paper looks like, and just so you guys can know.
I know what it looks like. It's the president.
This is what we're going to do later. So after we read our book, we're going to write 1 fact about George, 2 facts, 3 facts, and 4 facts. And so we're gonna find the information from our Scholastic, which is in our desk, and from the book we're going to read about today, right now. And as we go through, I'm going to stop you guys, and we're going to think, did we learn any facts on that page that we could write down? And I'm going to write some on the board, okay, just to kind of help us out. Sound good? Sasha, question?
We did the same thing in kindergarten.
Wonderful. So you guys should be ready.
With my eyes open.
Let's read about George Washington. George Washington was what number president? First. Abraham Lincoln's tomorrow. Ready? George Washington was born in Virginia in 1732. At that time, Virginia was one of the 13 colonies. The colonies belonged to the country of England. Do we believe that we could put a fact, maybe that he was born in Virginia? That's a good fact to write down. So we're going to write born in Virginia. First graders, thank you. Born in Virginia. Let's see what else we can find out. Young George grew up on a farm. He loved to ride horses and catch fish. What did he grow up on? He grew up on a farm. Would that be something we could put down as a fact? Yeah. George had many brothers and sisters. He looked up to his older brother, Lawrence. Lawrence was a soldier. He fought for England. George also wanted to be a soldier one day.
He was a leader.
Right. George did not go to school. He was taught at home. George practiced his handwriting by copying rules of good manners into a book. So did George go to school?
No.
That's an interesting fact, isn't it? He was homeschooled. So he grew up on a farm. He didn't go to school. He was born in Virginia. So he was homeschooled.
And also he liked riding horses.
He did like riding horses, didn't he? Mystic, I'm hearing talking when I shouldn't right now.
I don't know anything about him.
He was homeschooled. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because we all go to school. At age 16, George went to live with Lawrence. Who's Lawrence?
His big brother.
His older brother. Their farm was called Mount Vernon. George rode horses and hunted foxes. He danced at parties and practiced his good manners. He had never been happier. George is right here. This is George when he was really young.
George Washington.
Nope, that one's...
That's George Washington?
Yep, that might be Lawrence's brother, but this is George. Yep.
George Washington.
Right, that's that. Because when George Washington got older, he had hair like that. But remember, he's 16 in this picture. So he's really young. No, thank you, Maya. At age 17, George had a very important job. He measured land using special tools. The land of America was still new. People needed to know where the rivers were, where forests and mountains were. George did his job very well. He loved the land. So what did he do as a job? It says he measured the land. And what did he want? He wanted to make sure people knew where the rivers were, where mountains were. tell your parents. Hudson.
I know someone who's homeschooled.
Hudson knows somebody that's homeschooled, just like George was. Ivan.
He's using a camera.
It's a camera-like thing. It's kind of, I think you know what it is kind of like binoculars. You know what binoculars are?
Yeah.
But it's a really long kind of scope one. It's just one.
My dad goes hunting.
George grew into a tall, strong man. In 1753, he became a soldier. Now that's an interesting fact. Amaya, what's one fact that we've learned about George so far? What's something that we've learned about him so far? He was homeschooled. Somebody else. Hudson. He grew up on a farm. Lily.
But he became a soldier.
He became a soldier. Hayden. He was born in Virginia. Mystic.
All those things down. I noticed that you were using red and blue.
I am using red and blue. Thank you. Okay. You know what, Ryder, first graders, thank you. Ryder asked me a very important question. He says, Miss Russell, are you going to write all those down on the board?
No.
You know what? I think you guys can remember them in your head. And when you go to write your facts, I think you'll be like, oh, George Washington, he was born in Virginia. He was homeschooled. He was on a farm. I think you guys are going to remember that. And if you don't remember, what do you have in your desk that you can use, Lily?
Scholastic News.
Scholastic News. Connor, eyes on me. Scholastic News. So if you can't remember a fact, you can go ahead and pull out your Scholastic News. Right. You know what? If you can't spell, it's okay. Remember yesterday when I couldn't spell decisions? All I want you to write down is what the sounds that you hear. It's okay. We can misspell words. It's not a bad thing to misspell. I just want you to try, okay? At that time, England and France were fighting over America. Both of these countries wanted to own this new land. George fought bravely for England, and in the end, England won. Life as a soldier was very hard. George was happy when it was time to go home, but he did not go back alone. In 1759, George married Martha Custis? Martha. So his wife's name was? Martha. She is very pretty, isn't she? Emerson.
But
I will keep those up there. But I know that you guys have a lot more in your head. Ivan.
George. Her name, it sounds like Martin Luther King.
A little bit, yeah. Her name's Martha. Martha and her 2 children. So how many children did George have? 2. Moved to Mount Vernon. George spent the next 16 years working as a farmer. Kenzie.
My grandmother lived in Mount Vernon.
Wow. Then in 1775, George was called to war again. This time, he would fight against England. So the first time he was fighting for England, and the second time he was fighting against England. What's the name of his wife? Martha. The 13 colonies of America wanted to be free. The people asked George Washington to lead them in the war. Remember we learned that in our Scholastic News?
Yeah.
He led the war. George did not think he was the right man for the job, but he knew that he had to try. England was a very strong country. The war went on for many years. George and his soldiers were often cold, tired, and hungry. But they would not give up. With George as their leader, the colonies won their freedom in 1783. And after they won their freedom, we learned in our Scholastic News that now they're able to, Emerson, now they're able to do what now that they won that war? They can make their own laws, right? Because we won this war. They now call themselves the United States of America. Americans now had to vote for a person to lead their new country. The choice was easy. George Washington became the first president on April 30th, 1789.
So April.
George Washington was a peaceful man who loved the land. He never wanted to be a leader, but he served America both in war and in peace. As our first president, he is known as the father of our country.
That wasn't a long story. Hello, father of our country.
All right, friends. Well, you know what I'm going to put down? First graders, I don't hear listening ears. Hudson, I'm not seeing your eyes.
My dad.
What else was George Washington called? He was called the
Father of our country.
father of our country. I think that's so important. So I'm going to write it right here. He was George, and he was the father
of the country.
of our country.
I said country. I almost said country, not our.
Okay, so I want everybody, if you have an idea of facts that we know about George Washington. We may have said them before, maybe not, but I want people to raise their hand and tell me what they know about George Washington. I want to see new hands, new hands. What do we know about George Washington? Jocelyn. That he was homeschooled. What do we know about George Washington, Lily?
That he's also called father of our country.
That he also is called father of our country, Emerson.
He lives on a farm.
He lives on a farm, Amaya. He was a soldier. New hands. I want to see new hands. What are you going to write on what do you know about George? He was our first president. Sasha, what do you know?
Born in Virginia.
He was born in Virginia. Chelsea.
The first time he did the war, they were
Europe.
doing war. They were against.
He was with Europe. And the second time he did war, he was against Europe. Kenzie, what do you know?
England.
Oh, it was England. I'm sorry. England and Europe, sometimes I get those confused because they both start with an E. Kenzie.
That he went to war twice.
He went to war twice. Connor, what do you know?
He had two.
He had two what? Yes! Anybody know his wife's name? Sasha, what's his wife's name? Mystic, help him out.
Martha Custis.
Martha! What else do we know about George? Can anybody think of anything else? Brayden?
He had white hair.
He did have white hair when he was older, right?
And he had.
How about his brother's name? Who remembers his brother's name? Who remembers? I want to see new hands. Brayden?
Wait, no.
No, who remembers? Jocelyn?
What?
What's his brother's name? George Washington's brother's name? Mystic? Lawrence. Okay, so this is what we're going to do when we go back to our desks. We're each going to get this paper. Sasha, I hope you're focusing right now so you know what to do when you get back to your desk. So we're each going to have this paper. And do you notice that these circles are kind of small?
No.
So do you think that we can write really big?
Yeah.
Thank you, writer. Probably not, right? It's probably not a really good idea to write really big.
Like really small or really big? It's like bigger
So
than a
what I want you guys to do is in full sentences. What comes at the beginning of a sentence?
Capital.
A capital letter. What goes at the end of a sentence, Carson? Period. So when I come around, should I see capital letters?
Yeah.
Should I see periods?
Yeah.
Unhouse sitting on your bottom, please. I'm going to go over what we're going to do. I'm going to do one fact for you guys. And you guys can choose any fact you want because we know so much about George Washington now, okay? So I'm going to say, let's say I want to spell George Washington. Look at this resource right here. George Washington. Emerson.
If you're done like yesterday, can you write another?
You can write more if you have room, or you can always turn it around on the back too and write about George. Okay, so here we go. I want to say George Washington led our army. That's what I want to say. I don't know how to spell George Washington. What can I, oh look, right here. It says George Washington right here on our paper. So I'm going to say George. You're right. I didn't write my name, didn't I? George Washington. George Washington. What am I going to say? What did I decide I was going to say? George Washington.
What's your leader of our
Are we talking about that right now, or are we talking about George Washington? We're talking about George Washington. George Washington was the leader of our army. Okay, what do you notice at the beginning of, Julie? No, thank you. What do we notice at the beginning of my sentence? Capital letter. And what's at the end of my sentence? A period. Okay. So everybody listen. Should we be talking to our neighbor during this time?
No.
No. Should we be working independently?
Yes.
Yes. If we don't know how to spell a word, are we going to say, I don't know how to spell? Or are we going to try to sound it out and write down the letters that we hear? And if it's our word wall word, we're going to look at our word wall. Amaya, back to your desk, please. Thank you. We're going to be quiet. We're going to write our 4 facts. Remember, we're going to do it in our best handwriting because when you're not going to put them in your cubbies, I'm going to collect them because I want to show some of my professors your work. I want to say, look at my first graders. Look at their nice handwriting. Look at their capital letters. Look at how they use their periods and punctuation. Look at how they do. So we're going to write 4 facts. If you have time and want to write more, what can you do? Go ahead and turn it around in the back and write some more, okay? Emerson.
How much professors do you have?
I have many professors. So I'm going to show them and I'm going to say, look at what my first graders can do.
Yes, 35.
Okay, I'm looking for quiet friends to send back to their desks to get started. And I know you guys know so much about George Washington. And if you guys... We read a book about George Washington. We have our Scholastic News. If you can't think of something, you can use your Scholastic News in your desk.
What if you can?
Miss Duke, I'm looking for quiet friends to get started.
First one.
Writing our name at the top should be our first thing.